Merry Christmas, written by USA Today bestselling author Lexy Timms, copyright 2023 by Lexy Timms, narrated by Kathleen Starr Hall. Chapter 23, December 23rd. They had been waiting in the police station for what felt like hours. Blair glanced up at the clock on the wall, her neck sore from sitting for so long. A little after 12 midnight. "Blair, you really don't have to stay," Coulson repeated to her for what felt like the 100th time that night. He was pacing up and down the waiting area, his hands jammed into his pockets as he kept eyeing the clock on the wall. Ever since getting that phone call from the police, Blair had insisted on staying to support him. First, she had driven them down to the station. Then she had waited with him, occasionally getting coffee for them as the night wore on. And through it all, Coulson had pleaded with her several times to go home and get some rest. Each time, she had refused to leave. His father had been arrested. On top of that, he'd previously been missing for days. How could she just leave him to deal with that on his own? "I'm not leaving," she said firmly. "Besides, if the roles were reversed, you wouldn't leave me." He stopped his pacing to look at her. "No, I wouldn't leave." "So why would you expect me to leave?" she asked gently. "Because my father has acted like an ass," Coulson reminded her. "He's insulted and demeaned you. The main reason I've tried with him this year is because you've encouraged it. The only reason I'm paying his bail is because you'd never forgive me if I didn't." "You're right. I wouldn't forgive you," she said. "I know he's said harsh things about me." "He's been worse than harsh," Coulson interrupted. "My old man has judged you and everyone around him only to wind up in jail. Finally, proof that he isn't better than everybody else." Based on his agitation, it was pretty clear that she wasn't going to talk him out of his anger right now. Coulson seemed dead set on defending her now that his father had pushed too far. She supposed it had been easier to accept his father's flaws when they had only been personal issues. Probably much harder to accept in light of his father's arrest. "I appreciate you trying to stick up for me," she said softly, "but this isn't about me, is it?" "How can it be when everything has to be about him?" Coulson demanded as he started restlessly pacing again. Sympathy made her reach out to take his hand. He stopped the moment she touched him. "It's the holidays, Coulson," she said. "Harsh as he is, I think your father deserves a little patience. We could all use a little patience this time of year." Coulson stared at her for several moments. He looked like he might be trying to formulate an argument, but instead, he heaved out a breath and sat down beside her. "A little patience," he said with an absent nod as he squeezed her hand. Then he lifted her hand, bringing it to his lips to press a kiss to her knuckles. The tender, loving gesture took her by surprise. Her stomach fluttered. They had become close over the past several weeks, and yet each day felt like the intimacy between them intensified, as if they were already a real couple. She tried not to think in those terms. Hoping for more was futile. He lived in Boston. By the time the new year swung around, this would be over. She could feel the lump forming in her throat. Only she had no time to dwell on her sadness because a police officer shuffled into the waiting room. The officer stared down at the clipboard in his hands as he walked over. "Mr. Coulson Bennett?" "Yup," Coulson said, getting up to quickly shake the officer's hand. "Pleased to meet you. I'm Jeffers," the cop said. "Good to meet you. Is my father okay? What are the charges against him?" "Well, he's still real drunk." "Drunk? Again?" Coulson sighed heavily. "Yeah, I suspect your father really likes his liquor," Officer Jeffers said. "We've booked him on public mischief and drunk and disorderly charges after we found him passed out in the front of the Golden Age antique shop." Blair's mouth fell open. "He passed out in front of my store?" Jeffers nodded as he started to flip through the notepad attached to the clipboard. "Yeah, based on eyewitness accounts, he was seen at one of the bars in town, got extremely drunk, left, and made a nuisance of himself on the way back to his accommodations at the local inn." "A nuisance?" Blair asked. "Yeah, apparently he was kissing women under the mistletoe," Jeffers explained. "He was harassing women," Coulson demanded. Well, all of the ladies we spoke to stated the kissing was consensual. 'More than welcome,' one of them is quoted as saying. Apparently he asked them. They seemed to find him charming. 'Like a sexy Santa,' another woman said." Coulson groaned as he raked a hand through his hair in frustration. "For shit's sake." The officer paused to look at Coulson. "You're from the city, right? Well, here in Mislin Bush, we have this tradition where I'm well aware, Coulson hit out. So he wasn't harassing them, just cheating on my mom. Officer Jeffers grimaced. His personal situation isn't the law's business. What is the law's business is your father was loud and obnoxious enough to cause noise complaints, and then he was found sprawled out in public in front of a store. A good Samaritan thought he was injured and called the police. Cops arrived at the scene, determined he was drunk, and saw no choice but to bring him down to the station. Unbelievable, Coulson muttered. Has he passed out in public before? The officer asked him. Honestly, I've only seen him get drunk once, so I don't know how often he does this, Coulson admitted. We're not exactly close. That's too bad, the officer said, sounding like he meant it. You're here to make bail. Coulson nodded. Yeah, great, the officer said, gesturing to the front desk a few feet away. You'll be called up to fill out some paperwork up front. In the meantime, I'll get your dad out of his cell. Thanks, officer, Coulson said. Don't sweat it. Usually it's quiet all year, then bam, we get nothing but drunks at Christmas. Most wonderful time of year, right? Officer Jeffers laughed, slapped Coulson on the shoulder good-naturedly, and then proceeded to shuffle off. At least the charges aren't too serious, she said. Yeah, when the cops called, I was worried that my father had robbed your store, Coulson said. Her eyes widened. What? Think about it, Coulson said. He ransacked the mansion a few days ago, and tonight he was found outside your store. He's after that ring. Blair knew that the ruby and emerald ring could easily go for $15,000, maybe even $20,000 if they found a buyer who was interested in the historical context. But your father's rich. He doesn't need more money, she said. Blair, money and power are the only things my father cares about, he said, sounding much sadder than he probably intended. The ring is expensive, and my great-grandmother left it to me. To me, not to him. So not only would he try to seize his chance to sell it, he'd take it away from me to assert his power. Damn it, he can't stand that Opal left the house to me. It's proof that he can't have everything in the world, which pisses him off. It's also proof of how much Opal trusted you to take care of her memories, she pointed out. Coulson granted her a barely noticeable smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked so exhausted that her heart ached for him. What a way to spend the day before Christmas Eve, waiting for his estranged father to be let out of jail. Listen, if my father damaged your store, I'll foot the bill, he said. No, don't worry about that, she said. I mean it, Blair, he said. Either he pays or I do. You've put up with enough this Christmas. I haven't put up with anything, she assured him, wishing she could tell him just how much the past few weeks had meant to her. But a police station probably wasn't the best place to bare her soul right now. The officer at the front desk leaned forward and called out to Coulson. Be right back, he said. As he went to start filling out the paperwork, Officer Jeffers returned, gently but firmly pulling an older man by the elbow. Blair recognized Whitaker Bennett instantly. Despite his disheveled appearance and the fact that he reeked of alcohol, there was still something formidable about him, just like in his photos. Blair stood up to greet Coulson's father, but before she could speak, the older man swayed on his feet and drunkenly said, You're my son's new girlfriend. Girlfriend? No, well, Her face heated. She hadn't told anyone where she had been spending the past few nights, but it looked like his father had figured it out. You thought so, he said, red, bloodshot eyes narrowing. You better be nice to my boy. There are enough gold diggers in this world. Dad, that's enough. Quit while you're ahead, Coulson said, heading back over to get between his father and Blair. She doesn't need to hear a lecture from you. Wasn't lecturing her, his father said, his words slurred. Was telling her to be nice. If she's here for money, she can forget it. So she better be here for the right reasons. Coulson turned to get in his father's face. Apologize to her right now. Coulson, it's okay, she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. It's not, Coulson said in a firm tone. You're right. It isn't okay for him to talk to me like that, she agreed. But I meant that I can handle this. Coulson's father slumped against the police officer. You'll have to forgive my son. He's a hothead. Mr. Bennett, you should be thanking your son for bailing you out instead of leaving you to spend Christmas in a cell, Blair said sharply. The older man's jaw dropped, his white eyebrows lifting in irritation. Listen here, young lady. I'm not finished, she said, cutting him off bluntly as she crossed her arms. I really don't care what you think of me. I don't care if you think I'm not good enough or rich enough or educated enough. That's not something you get to decide. I'll decide if I'm enough and your son can make his own conclusions. I don't have to prove anything to you. I'm not on trial, and I'm definitely not the one who needed to be sprung out of jail. Even though Coulson and his father looked nothing alike, they both made the same stunned face. Blair found it amusing, but she had to remain stern if she was going to get through to a ruthless man like Whitaker. He wasn't the type to accept weakness, so this was the time to show a backbone. "You've got some nerve," Whitaker said gruffly. "Good," she fired back. Narrowing her eyes, she said, "You still haven't thanked Coulson yet." The expression on the older man's face softened just a little. He actually had the decency to look chastened as he glanced over at his son. "I'll repay the bail money," Whitaker said. "That isn't a thank you," Blair said, refusing to let this go. Whitaker scowled at her, then sighed. "Thanks for springing me out of jail." "You should thank Blair for picking you up," Coulson said, taking a step back to wrap his arm around her. "For crying out loud," his father muttered. "Do I have to kiss everyone's ass?" "Just Blair's," Coulson retorted, deploying his ironic humor in a tone that left no room for argument. "Fine. Miss Hawthorne, I appreciate you picking me up at this late hour," Whitaker said, giving a curt nod. "I assure you it won't happen again." "Better not," Coulson warned icily. Whitaker didn't say another word as Coulson released his hold on Blair to head over to his father. Coulson offered his shoulder, and his father slumped against him, grumbling under his breath. Blair followed father and son out of the station. It was probably infuriating for the older man to have to rely on his son to walk towards her car, but her heart warmed at how kind Coulson was being. In spite of his obvious anger, he was still trying to help his father. That spoke to his character, even though his father didn't seem to have the sense to fully appreciate it. When they got to the car, Coulson helped his dad into the back seat, shutting the door firmly once he got his dad settled. "I'm really sorry about this," Coulson said, turning to her. "Don't be sorry," she said. The outside lights made it easy to see the troubled expression on his face. Suddenly, a cold breeze blew in, ruffling Coulson's dark hair. "You must be freezing," he said, pulling her close. She smiled, enjoying the warmth of his arms around her. "It's not so bad when I have you to keep me warm." He chuckled, probably his first laugh since the call from the police. Relief filled her. At least she could still make him laugh. "Yeah, it's pretty nice having an excuse to hold on to you in this weather." Blair pressed her cheek against his chest, snuggling closer. She very nearly closed her eyes, but then she noticed that his father was giving them a look of disapproval through the backseat window. "Your dad is looking at us," she said. "Let him. I don't give a damn what he thinks," Coulson said. She blinked in surprise and pulled back to stare up at him. "You don't?" "No, I never did," he said. "Not when it comes to you. But what if I come between you guys again?" she asked, biting her lower lip. Coulson shook his head vigorously. "Nah, he's the one who should worry." "Worry?" Coulson stepped back to gently cradle her face between his hands. "My father is the one who should worry about coming between you and me, Blair. He should worry about coming between us." Us. Her heart skipped a beat. Then it started pounding so fast that hope instantly flooded her. Was there really a chance for them? She knew the only way to find out was to finally confess her feelings. As if reading her mind, he said, "There are so many things we have to talk about." "Yes," she agreed, her voice trembling ever so slightly. It was a miracle that she wasn't babbling all of the thoughts swirling around in her head. "I hoped we could talk about the future." "Yeah, that's exactly what I want to talk about." He stared deep into her eyes, seemingly unable to look away. "And since tomorrow's Christmas Eve—" "You should sort things out with your dad first," she said, interrupting. Though she didn't know exactly what Coulson planned on saying to her, Blair knew what she wanted to say, and she couldn't do it if Coulson's mind was elsewhere. Making sure his father was okay mattered most of all right now. Coulson looked crestfallen. Disappointment flashed in his eyes. "Yeah, I guess so." "But my family does have a Christmas Eve tradition," she told him. "We each open one of our presents. I was thinking I could give you your present tomorrow." "So that I can open it?" he finished for her. "Yes, and I could open yours," she said. "But before we exchange gifts, let's focus on getting your dad somewhere safe tonight." Okay, we can take my dad back to the mansion so I can keep an eye on him while he sleeps off the alcohol, Colson said. Then I can iron things out with him once he wakes up. She nodded. That's a good plan. If things get dire, I'll be at my dad's house making Christmas dinner. We try to make things a couple days before, but if you need help, I can stop by. Colson paused to kiss her gently. Take the day to spend with your family. I'll handle my dad. You sure? Yeah. Just promise me we'll talk on Christmas Eve, he said, desperation lacing his words. She reached up to press her hand to his cheek, hoping that one final touch would give them the warmth they both needed. I promise. Colson was in the kitchen, finishing off his breakfast of bacon and eggs when his father wandered in. You're still alive, Colson observed wryly from his seat at the kitchen island. Unfortunately, his father returned in a sardonic tone. The old man looked like death warmed over, white-haired, disheveled, jaw unshaved, and his clothes were a rumpled mess. His face was red and his eyes still bloodshot. Despite his irritation at his father, Colson remained concerned about his well-being. How did you sleep? Wincing, his father pressed his fingers to his temple. Slept off the worst of it, but my head is pounding. Must be a hangover. Yes, well, going on a drunken bender will do that, Colson said, unable to hide his bitterness. I thought we weren't going to be doing any lectures, his father said, half walking, half stumbling towards the chair opposite Colson. You don't have the moral authority to give lectures right now, Colson retorted. The people who got you out of jail, however, do. Don't act like you didn't go on your share of drunken benders, his father shot back. Sure, when I was in college. And I didn't pull stupid stunts like trying to break into antique stores or kiss random women, Colson pointed out in disgust. The worst thing I did was puke or jump into a freezing cold swimming pool with my clothes on. We all have our moments. You're a grown man, Colson said angrily. Too old to be making an ass of yourself. I still haven't told Mom you wound up in jail. You haven't? His father said quickly, looking relieved. Thank goodness. She'd hold that over my head. Colson glared at his dad. The only reason I avoided telling her is because I didn't want to be the one to reveal you're a cheating asshole. You're going to be the one to tell her the truth, his father sighed. Your mother wouldn't care if I slept with every woman in this town. What? She wouldn't care, his father repeated, sounding almost pitiful. No amount of acting out would get her attention except for ending up in jail. Right. Jail tarnishes the family name. You running around and cheating, however, just gives her license to do the same. Mom's cheating on you? Colson asked. No, but she could if she wanted to, his father explained. A truth that she lords over me all the time. Anyway, my actions last night hardly count as cheating. They do to me, Colson said through gritted teeth. Do you know how freaking embarrassing it was for Blair to see your antics? Oh, yes, the famous Miss Hawthorne, his dad frowned. Wonderful. Now that gold digger has ammo to use against me. She isn't a gold digger, and you're one to talk. Colson had to clench his fist to keep from losing his temperature. You showed up at her store to rob the place? What are you... The ring, Colson accused, cutting him off sharply. Emeralds and rubies? Does that jog your memory? His father sank down into the chair with a groan. The room is spinning. Tell me you've got a cure for this. Sighing, Colson got to his feet and headed for one of the kitchen cabinets. He'd probably only get his father to come clean if he found a way to alleviate the old man's hangover symptoms. Haven't used this since college. Don't want to hear any complaints about it. What is it? Raw egg and tomato juice, he responded. Behind him, Colson's father made gagging noises. Are you trying to kill me? Colson opened one of the cabinets to retrieve a glass. You wanted a cure. This is it. His father continued to grumble, but made no further complaints. Soon enough, Colson had filled the glass with tomato juice and dropped a raw egg into the glass. Here, he said, approaching the island to push the glass towards his father. Did you want to spend Christmas with me in order to get your hands on the ring? In response, his father grabbed the glass and started to gulp, a sign that he'd rather drink a raw egg than answer the question. Not that it mattered. Colson wasn't going to let his old man leave the kitchen until he got an answer. He could stay here all day. His father drained the glass, gasping and sputtering when it was finished. This cure better work. Answer the question, Colson ordered, resuming his seat. All right, you got me. I was after the ring, his father finally confessed. Why? Opal used to wear it every Christmas, his father explained. Did I tell you that I used to spend Christmases here? Really? What were they like? Coulson asked. They could have been wonderful were it not for my parents, his father replied. Opal was kind and generous as always, but my parents did not want to spoil or indulge me, so they refused her gifts and left me alone in my room upstairs while they ate Christmas dinner. Opal would sneak the best of the Christmas dinner to me, and we'd eat together in my room. She was a saint, that woman. Is that the only reason you wanted the ring? His father clenched his jaw. Fine. You want the whole truth? That ring cost a pretty penny, and if anybody should benefit from this house, it's me. I'm the family patriarch. Why should you get everything? What have you done to earn all this? None of us have earned this, Coulson reminded his father. We have all inherited wealth that we did not work for, and instead of treating that privilege as a blessing to share with other people, you treat it like a bludgeon to wield against other people. Opal loved you, and instead of loving her back, all you've done is try to take a torch to her memory. You wanted to steal her prized possession so you could profit off of it. And what about you? His father demanded. Don't get all high and mighty. What are your plans when you sell this house and everything in it? I plan to give the money away, Coulson said, to the underprivileged people of this town, because if this town is our home and we have all this money, there shouldn't be any underprivileged people. We have to start taking care of people, Dad. We have to start giving a damn. His father went silent for several moments, the expression on the old man's face turning to sadness. You know where you're wrong. I did care for Opal, his father insisted. I miss her. Especially this being the first Christmas since her passing. Why do you think I started drinking again? Again? Every few years I come under stress and I don't take it well, his father admitted. One year it was discovering that your mother didn't care about anyone but herself. Another year it was a midlife crisis. Once it was the year you crashed your bike into a tree. I was a kid when that happened, Coulson said, remembering the year he'd broken his arm. That crash looked really bad from any vantage point, his father said, averting his gaze. I thought the worst. Handled that with a few too many drinks for the next couple of months. Damn it, Dad. Look, I haven't been the best father, the old man conceded. Yeah, no shit, Coulson said. You're a drunk, a thief, a liar, a cheater, and you disrespected Blair when all she did was try to help your sorry ass. Miss Hawthorne is more refined than I thought she'd be, his father said. Much nicer as well. Everybody isn't as cutthroat as you, Dad, Coulson said. And even though I tried that for a while, I'm not very cutthroat either. Well, except when it comes to Blair. I'll do anything to protect her. You get that right? If you ever disrespect her again, I'll sever all ties with you. Is that clear? His father knitted his fingers together and nodded sheepishly. Crystal clear, son. Good. Do you love Miss Hawthorne? His father asked. Coulson responded with a question of his own. Is it that obvious? It is, his dad said, nodding. Not that it's any of your business, but yeah, I love her. Coulson's heart rate sped up because he had no idea how he was going to tell her. She's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Hold on to that, his father said. Getting married for love is better than getting married to keep up appearances. If you love Mom, you should take your own advice and fight for her, Coulson told his father, suddenly understanding the man for the first time. His father kept people at arm's length with a mix of feigned indifference and genuine superiority. He was cutthroat because he believed he was better than everyone else, but also because he feared that people would gain the upper hand if they knew his weaknesses. So he came out swinging every time, hurt others before they hurt him, much of it stemming from his own parents' cruel mistreatment. Regardless of the reasons, all of it was to his detriment. At least now that Coulson understood, he could practice a little patience with his father. A little. After all, he wasn't a saint like his great-grandmother Opal. Your mother and I both married for appearances, and I ended up in love with the woman, his father said. Doubt she feels the same way. Well, I'm rooting for you two, Coulson said sincerely. After meeting Blair, he'd learned that just about anything was possible when it came to loving someone. The only way to get the impossible, though, was to try, so he was going to try his best and hope like hell that Blair shared the same feelings. "I appreciate that, son," his father said gruffly. "By the way, my assistant tells me that we've purchased your Christmas gift, but you'll have to retrieve it when you return to Boston." "No problem. Speaking of presents, I'll go get yours." Coulson got up and stepped out of the kitchen to retrieve the photo album from the study. When he returned to the kitchen, he handed the leather-bound album over to his father. "Thought you'd want some of these." His father took the album and started flipping through it. "Hey, I'd forgotten all about this," he said, pointing to a photo of himself as a young boy in the very same kitchen. His father was holding up a wooden spoon, helping Opal mix batter for a cake. "Some years I helped Opal make Christmas dinner." "That's good. I'm glad you could find that memory," Coulson said. "Thanks, son." His father closed the album. "Since we're on the topic, what are we having for Christmas dinner anyway?" "We aren't having anything," Coulson said firmly. Despite this uneasy truce with his dad, he wasn't going to forget that his old man had originally wanted them to spend Christmas together so he could steal a ring. "You're on your way back to Boston." "Of course. You want to spend Christmas with Miss Hawthorne," his father said with a knowing smile. "I get it." Coulson pulled out his phone to start making plans for his father's return trip to the city. Once he got that sorted out, he had to figure out exactly what he was going to say to Blair tomorrow when they exchanged presents. Because tomorrow was Christmas Eve, and he wanted everything to go perfectly.